Hi, I'm Dr. Barney Roca, the Spokane chiropractor, and today I'm hosting Donuts for Democracy.
Morning.
Good morning. You are Mr. Bajun, how do you pronounce your last name?
Bajun Mavalwalla.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining me today for Donuts for Democracy. You're running for Washington's 5th Congressional District, and if you had to, you've been on the road, I've seen you out a lot around the community, all around the district. What would you say is the most important issue to voters in the Washington's 5th?
There is no single most important issue. If you travel around this district, if you talk to the voters in all the different areas out here, you'll find that the most important issues are very much regional and sometimes right down to a small town or even a neighborhood. Just as an example, the big beautiful bill is cutting off funding to regional hospitals. That's a huge issue in a lot of communities. Although, for example, in Pomeroy, they don't think it's going to happen, or at least there's a large population there that doesn't think it's going to happen. Because they passed a measure, a levy, but there's no way that levy is going to actually cover it. However, down the road in Dayton, they're very much aware that their hospital could go. And if you go to their hospital, it's the largest employer in town. What happens when you cut out 300 plus jobs in a town the size of Dayton? The entire economy dries up. It could be devastating for that entire economy. But if you go up to Colville or Pend Oreille County, Chief Schultz from the Forest Service is shutting down probably 130 jobs in that area. Again, these are good paying federal jobs. Not to mention, forests need management because you either log it, you graze it, or you watch it burn. And if you don't do your forest management properly, you're going to have devastating downstream effects. If you go to Pullman, there's a 20% drop in the enrollments at Washington State universities. Pullman's almost entire economy is based on Wazoo. If you go to Walla Walla, if you go to College Place doesn't have a single child care center. An entire community that has no child care available to it. If you go to Clarkston, Walla Walla Community College is slated to be shut down in 2 more years. It's not just their nursing program, and it's not just convenience. The economy of that area has a bunch of skilled labor where the people that are working in those industries there get their training at Walla Walla Community College. When you're going to be a representative somewhere, you have to understand the community. You have to understand what's going on at that level. And the job is representative. The excuse of, oh, well, that's a state issue, or that's a local issue, or there's nothing on the federal level where I can count that. That's not what a representative does. So when they cut 136 jobs at the VA here in Spokane, no, that is not something that you go and pass legislation to put that back. That's when the representative picks up the phone, calls Secretary Collins at the VA, and says, what the hell are you doing? You have to make sure that you are representing your constituents, but there's not a single issue.
Well, I agree that there are multiple issues that our district faces, but I do believe that I think they can be ranked. And as you said, healthcare is an important issue, but forestry is an issue to some people, and it's a very important issue to them. But I think that there can be an overarching theme. So maybe another way to ask the same question: if you are elected to represent the 5th district in DC, what would be the most critical issue to you? What would you not be willing to sacrifice, or what is non-negotiable? What would be that one issue to you?
The one issue that's never negotiable is human rights. But if what you're looking for is a simple answer to a mind-bogglingly complex question,
More looking for just find one topic to discuss. I mean, we can't just talk about this like we
well,
talk
then why
about.
don't you ask the subject? Because there is no one overarching subject.
Okay.
There is no one overarching topic.
Well, I think if I spoke with a bunch of farmers earlier this year in regards to how they're being squeezed from all angles, whether it's state policy, federal policy, and immigration and trade wars, all the different factors that are leading to a squeeze in our local markets. When you talk about the one big beautiful bill and some of these health care places being shut down, or the enrollment at WSU, I think that these are smaller pieces to a larger issue. And if I were to pick one issue that would be most important to this district right now, I think I would choose the cost of living, which cost of living can be broken down into healthcare and childcare, and as well as flat wages, because the wages have been pretty stagnant for the past number of generations. So income versus cost is what gives you cost of living, and then the cost of fuel. It's all these things together come into a cost of living, housing, healthcare, and income and other things. So if we could bring it into that category, what would you do in order to fight the cost of living if you were elected to represent us in Washington?
Once again, similar to many large issues like that, there are multiple causes and there are multiple issues involved, and you name some of them. If you're talking about prices for fuel, prices for energy, prices for gasoline, if you go into an ill-advised war with Iran, for example, that's going to send the markets, and that's exactly what has happened, and we're seeing it at the gas pump. And now they have, once again, fired that war back up. Now, I spent 2 years in Iraq. I did 2 tours in Afghanistan. I'm very familiar with what's going on with Iran, but what has actually happened there is that the original goal, if you remember the first couple of days, because these goals have changed 5-6 times under this administration, the original goal they said was regime change, except that regime is now cemented in and is probably stronger than ever, thanks to the external threat that the United States has posed. We've actually galvanized the regime out there. We are now dealing with a destabilized market, and the Middle East is a huge, huge oil market. Oil markets are global. So whether the oil is coming out of Vladivostok from Russia, or if it's coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, or whether it's coming from Nigeria or Venezuela or anything else, that's going to affect us here at home. When you're talking about your farmers are not getting their regular farm bill. The reason that there's a farm bill every 5 years is that it is designed to help farmers through the current market. And if you go longer than 5 years, you're no longer dealing with the current market, you're dealing with the older market. When you're talking about what cost of living is, we haven't raised the minimum wage since I think 2007. The minimum wage is the base wage in which all other wages are driven. So all of those things end up culminating, but they're all different topics.
So
the cost of living is a symptom.
So would you fight to raise the minimum wage?
Absolutely.
Okay. And in terms of fighting costs, you feel that ending the war in Iran would be an important step to take to bring cost of living down for Americans?
I can't think of an end to the number of reasons to stop the war in Iran. We just lost 4 more soldiers over the weekend. It is an unwinnable war, number one. On a military basis alone, it cannot be won unless you are willing to put 750,000 to 1 million troops on the ground and occupy the country for 20 to 30 years. You'll need an entire generation to die off there entirely before you can actually change the regime. And then what do you get out of that? People that make you feel better about yourself. That's not why you go to war. right? You go to a war, specifically, von Clausewitz says, you go to war to achieve political ends. Sun Tzu says the same thing. Philosophically, you do not go to war because somebody made you feel bad.
And then he spoke about human rights being one of the non-negotiable items. What are some of those rights?
The basic human rights as lined out in the UN Charter are, things that people don't necessarily think of, but food, water, shelter. Here's one that people forget about: security. Security is a human right. Now, we're violating human rights in Iran by going to war unprovoked. And by the way, the notion that Iran has a nuclear stockpile is ridiculous. The Iran deal that President Obama negotiated, the first thing in there, remember, it was called the P5+1, and that's because the +1 was Germany. Because it wasn't Germany itself, it was Siemens. Because Siemens made the centrifuges that they used to separate their fissile material. So the issue there is that there were 20,000 centrifuges. The deal took away 15,000 of those, so they only have 5,000 left. Nuclear material, by nature, degrades. With 5,000 centrifuges, you simply cannot separate enough nuclear material for weapon grade before it starts to deteriorate and you can't use it. So the deal was working, and then we pulled out of this deal. But the human rights part of it, it's not just missing a target, because when you go to war, that does that. It is drawing people into a conflict where their water, we've been destroying their salinization plants, their power generation. That's necessary for everybody out there. And then it's destabilized the reason to where Iran is attacking others.
But you're talking about Iran right now.
We're talking about Iran, but that's still human rights. When we took away, I'm going to start internationally and then I'm going to bring it closer to home. When we took away USAID, we also, literally, there's been hundreds of thousands of people around the world who have starved or otherwise suffered because of that. That's destabilizing. That causes war. When I was in Iraq, when I was in Afghanistan, the guys that we ended up killing were simple people at the bottom of the food chain who were put at gunpoint or otherwise convinced of religious fanatical leaders or divinity of some kind. And that's who we ended up killing. These are not the masterminds. These are not particularly dangerous people, except that we were there providing ready targets, and that motivated their leadership to fight us. Now, you start bringing this closer to home. The rights that are in the Bill of Rights, you have to look at what we do as a country to protect our constitutional rights. My son's case is just an extreme example, where they sent the FBI, who should be out catching bank robbers, who should be catching human traffickers, who should be dealing with drug dealers, who should be dealing with the international pig butchering organizations that are wiping out little old ladies' life savings. Those are the sort of things that the FBI should be fighting, not arresting protesters in Spokane. Then you have an illegally appointed U.S. attorney. So the first U.S. attorney resigns from that case because he says this is not what we're supposed to be doing as a U.S. attorney. That's unconstitutional. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. It's not supposed to be politically motivated on who you're arresting. Then they bring in Pete Serrano. Now remember, Pam Bondi fired another one in between, but then brings in Pete Serrano. Pete Serrano's never been confirmed by the Senate. He is illegally appointed. I have people talking about what is your opinion on rule of law. Well, the first thing is that by rule of law, you don't have an illegally appointed U.S. attorney serving here in Spokane. That's a human rights issue. Another human rights issue is why are we not dealing with the kidnapping of mostly women from Native American tribes? Why are we not talking about somebody's right to proper search and seizure? Fourth Amendment guarantees that you're supposed to have due process for that, yet ICE has the ability to write their own warrants. No judge. Again, that's not the Bill of Rights. Those are human rights where you're supposed to be protected and live under rule of law. We do not have those things. So there's a massive number of those things. But when it comes down to anything that we do in the government or as a citizen, you have those most basic human rights, and they're not negotiable.
Okay, so you mentioned the Fourth Amendment. So when you go to D.C., this is one of the things we fight for. What would you do to strengthen the Fourth Amendment? Because right there you have civil asset forfeiture, we have due process, we have a number of ways in which the Fourth Amendment has been eroded in the past 10, 15, 20 years. We don't necessarily have to point at one individual or one administration. This is an ongoing process that has been gnawing away at the Fourth Amendment over decades. So what is it that you would do if elected to protect our Fourth Amendment rights?
Well, you brought one of them up. Civil asset forfeiture. How many Americans actually know what that is? What would you say? I'd say very few. You're carrying $20,000 in cash in your car. You can't prove exactly how you got that. The police can just take it.
Right. You don't even need to be
no
accused
legal
of
process,
a crime.
not even accused of a crime. They can just take it. Now, certain police departments love it. That's how they fund themselves. But just an example of a case that was in the Midwest. There was a Chinese family. They have a restaurant, and they were going to a wedding. So they had somewhere between, I think, $15,000 and $20,000 to pay for the wedding, to give as gifts to the bride and groom. Police stopped them, took the money, said, "See ya." That is un-American, and we've got to pass laws against that.
So you create legislation to...
There's certain, well, absolutely. So remember, like I said, the job is representative. It's not all legislation, but some of it is. And one of the things that we're not going to be doing is passing a nonsense thing like the Big Beautiful Bill. So one of the first things that we have to do in this next upcoming Congress is start unspooling stuff from the Big Beautiful Bill. The reason that you don't pass massive, crazy, kitchen sink, kettle logic kind of bills like the Big Beautiful Bill is the only reason to do this is to hide stuff that nobody would want.
Pork.
It's not just pork. In the Big Beautiful Bill, it's the hospital cuts, those rural hospital cuts we were talking about earlier. It's also going to be talking about, in this district alone, it's estimated to be 30,000 people that are going to lose their Medicaid. Now think of the downstream effects of that. If you cut 30,000 people's Medicaid in this district, that's a whole bunch of families, like somewhere around 30,000 families, that are going to have to make that up. So now you might even have to have people quitting their jobs to take care of grandma because there's no longer funding under Medicaid to take care of them. People understand these things, but you have a responsibility. It is the responsibility, you have an obligation if you're going to be in office to be looking at secondary and tertiary effects of all of the legislation and all of the issues that are going to be coming out of the House of Representatives. And those aren't mysteries. They have mechanisms in there. You have the Congressional Budget Office. You have the different committees, many of which, by the way, were stripped by Newt Gingrich, the bipartisan legislative review. All of those things that used to be bipartisan mechanisms to talk about the true effects of legislation. And that's not just Republicans to blame. Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House twice since Newt Gingrich stripped all those rules. And she didn't reinstate those either.
When you spoke about human rights, you mentioned food, water, shelter, security. You were talking about that for Iran, but it's one of the issues that I've spoken to widely is the need for children in America to have access to clean water and sanitation, and for a relatively small amount of money, especially when compared to the amount of money that we're spending in Iran, we can make real strides in that. We have millions of children in this country, in America, that are homeless, and they do not have access to clean water and sanitation. We used to have a much broader infrastructure. When I was a kid, it was not a problem to leave the house without a bottle of water because the water was readily available wherever I went. And now that's not the case. The children don't have access to clean water and sanitation, which burdens our healthcare system. So how high of a priority is this? Are you going to fund clean water for children before you fund wars in foreign lands?
Well, I see what you're getting at, and I want to make sure that we're making sure that we're not creating a false dilemma. This is the usual argument that I hear on, oh my God, we've got to cut the military budget because we're taking, education benefits away from kids. No, this is the richest country in the world. We must be able to fund our Department of Defense, and we are perfectly capable. We've done it before with the Clean Water Act. The human rights issue is not limited to what's going on overseas. There's human rights issues here, as I was bringing up with my son. You are also have a right not to have the police kick in your door because they want to write a thing. It's not just clean water, it's not just access to food, but it is all of those things. Those are fundamental human rights, and we have plenty of resources in this country to pay for it.
Well, you bring up what I'm curious because I know it's about time. You said you want to be done by 7:30 or 7:29, but this is now the second or third time you've mentioned that your son's human rights were violated. What human? I don't understand. Maybe you could explain that to me. I'm familiar with to some degree what had happened, but I don't see how his human rights were violated. Could you explain that to me?
You have a right to freedom of speech.
Yeah.
It is literally in the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. If you do not have the right to protest your government, or if speaking against your government gets you arrested, you do not have freedom of speech. You do not have the right to protest. You do not have the right to dissent. And if you don't have that, you are living in a police state. So yeah, that's a human right.
Well, but there was a grand jury, a jury of his peers that brought the charges, and then there was a jury that convicted him. So it was not an individual that brought charges against your son. It was a jury of his peers, and this is the system, the criminal justice system that we have in the United States. So if his rights were violated, then anybody's rights that have been violated that have ever been arrested. He was not arrested for his freedom of speech. He was arrested for conspiracy for the actions of during that protest, and that was not a peaceful protest. There were windshields that were painted. There was obstruction. There was people that were being pushed. Now, I have not reviewed the evidence, but what I am doing is I am trusting the system that we have, and I'm trusting the citizens and his neighbors and his peers and his coworkers that sat on both of those juries, and those juries brought the charges, and a jury convicted him. So he. And I don't know, when you talked about human rights, you said food, water, shelter, security. Now, a civil right, by all means, absolutely, the First Amendment is a civil right, but I don't know that it's a human right that's enjoyed across the world. So what civil rights or human rights were violated, and what if you were elected, what would you do in order to fight for not only your son, but for the entire district to protect our collective rights?
First of all, I'm going to say that the premise of your question is completely incorrect. What you are saying is God is love, love is blind, Stevie Wonder is blind, Stevie Wonder is God. So, first of all, you were saying that the grand jury system, what happened in the Broadview 6 case?
I'm not talking about the Broadview 6
No,
case.
you are, and I am, because you're assuming that everything that happened there was proper and legal. It's not.
Talking about a very specific case.
If you're going to make your case, then you're going to allow me to answer. Okay? Broadview 6. This is the case where this administration had to let everybody go that was brought up in the Broadview 6. Why?
If you want to make a point, you can't.
Do you know why?
If you'd like to make a point,
okay,
you can.
I'm just saying, the reason why is they were tampering with the grand jury. That is a habit that this administration has. Now, they will not release the grand jury transcripts here. Why would that be? It's because they were tampering with the grand jury here as well as they have all across the country. You are saying that it was a legal process, except the first U.S. attorney was fired because he wouldn't bring the charges. The second U.S. attorney did sign the indictment, but she was fired within 3 weeks. No reason was given. Then they brought in a guy, Pete Serrano, who has never prosecuted a case in his entire life. He is grossly unqualified for the job. And that, again, it all came down from Pam Bondi and from this administration. And the instructions were to convict these people who were arrested for a non-violent protest. Now you are saying that because they were found guilty, but did you know that they were not allowed to talk about the First Amendment to the jury? Did you know the jury was not allowed to know that the first U.S. attorney was on there? You're shaking your head.
Well, that's not what I said. I asked specifically about how his rights were violated, and I said a jury trial is not a violation.
Because if your trial is unfair, your rights are violated.
And so your accusation is that the jury had been tampered with.
No, you're not. Okay, please pay close attention. The grand jury was most likely tampered with. Why? That's called Occam's razor. Occam's razor says that the most obvious solution is usually the correct one. This jury was not allowed to be informed because we were not allowed to talk about the most salient issues in the case. We were not allowed to talk about the U.S. attorney, which was central to who brought the charges and how the charges were brought. We were not allowed to talk about a lot of the events that took place at the event. And I will remind you of something else. My son was acquitted of all the original charges.
By a jury?
By the jury, the very jury you're talking about. All of those original charges. All of the original charges. He was acquitted. Halfway through the trial itself. So after a year, halfway through the trial itself, they added aiding and abetting to the charges. That's what they convicted him of, with instructions that were all but saying you have to convict them all of aiding and abetting, except for one thing. The only way that you can convict somebody of aiding and abetting in a case of a thought crime, which is what conspiracy is if my son is capable of telepathy. Because if you are not part of said conspiracy, it is not possible to aid and abet said conspiracy, which is why this has got a bunch of amicus briefs. It is why it's being looked at on Rule 29. It is why it's going to go to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals if that doesn't go through Rule 29. Also, you have to remember that the U.S. attorney lied to that jury when my son was on the stand. She said, you said this, 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 and this on Reddit. And my son said very specifically, I don't remember saying anything like that. Can you show us in the record? That's when she backpedaled, because there was nothing like that on the record. There was nothing like that on Reddit. She lied to the jury.
But the jury, when you mentioned these different names, but it was a grand jury that had brought the charges, and it was another jury that had convicted him. They weren't these individuals that you're pointing at. And my question was and remains specifically, how were his rights violated? And you said, to the best of my understanding, what you just explained,
so
is tampering with the
jury. What you're saying is, if somebody is convicted wrongly, if the law is not followed, if their Fourth Amendment rights are violated, remember, they wouldn't show, there's videotape of this, they would not show the warrant when they arrested my son. You're saying that none of those things matter. If there's a conviction, everything's good. Yes?
No, what I'm saying is a direct response to what you said was, how were his rights violated? What right was violated? How was it violated? And as
If
an
I
elected
were to, if
representative,
I send
excuse
ICE
me,
to kick
let
in
me
your
finish
door,
the question. And if you were elected to represent us, the 5th district, not your son, but the entire district, to Washington D.C., what would you do to protect all of our collective rights? That was what my question was.
I will make sure that ICE or no other law enforcement agency can go and kick in your door on a warrant they wrote themselves. That's against the Constitution, and it is being practiced. But apparently that has to be codified into law. If you want your rights to do things like, for example, conduct this interview, then you need those First Amendment protections. Those are the sort of things that you're supposed to be guaranteeing. You are a caretaker when you are a representative in a liberal democracy, in a democratic republic. It is not an option, it is an obligation. And when you let those sort of things go by because somebody says something you don't like, or when you assume that a jury always gets things right when they are not given the actual evidence, those are fundamental human rights, those are fundamental civil rights that we guarantee in this country. Those are being violated. And the country has got a long history of that sort of thing because we are a democracy. So we have a constant struggle between our freedoms and order. That is the nature of a free country. We are not acting within the best interest of individual rights in this country right now.
So criminal justice reform, is this what I'm hearing? Is this that you would fight to reform the criminal justice system?
There's certain things there as well. The qualifications of certain things. But if you have a sick organization, you have to constantly be working on straightening out those things. I am a police advisor. I was trained as an international police advisor, and I was a police advisor to the Afghan National Civil Order Police. I was also the intelligence officer for the 49th MP Brigade, and then I was working on rule of law issues when I was at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. I have seen what it is like in a country where your political enemies get snatched up by the police. And in Diwania province, the chief of police would give drugs to people that made their kidneys fail. He'd take a half-inch drill and drill through their ankles, drill through their kneecaps, drill through their chests. That's what happens when you allow political expedience and take the chain off of law enforcement. And it can happen here. Maybe not to that extreme these days, but we used to torture people in this country. We used to beat them, starve them, and we have locked up whole groups, from Native Americans to the Japanese Americans to Gitmo, for suspected activity, even U.S. citizens. We cannot allow that sort of thing to happen if we are truly a free country.
In America or across the world, across the globe?
It's a standard that has to be around the world. Now, that said, we do not go as a country plowing into Iran because they violate human rights, do they? Yes. Then why haven't we invaded China? Why haven't we gone into Saudi Arabia? There's a lot of things in the world where we have to be practical, and then there are some things where we have to draw a line. And the people that are in judgment of those decisions are your people in Congress and the Senate and the White House, your elected representatives. Once again, it's an obligation. It is not an option.
Well, when you talked about human rights, you mentioned shelter as a human right. And in the United States, we have a tremendous housing crisis that's been allowed to unfold for generations. If shelter is a human right and water is a human right, and we have plenty of American children that are going without both water and shelter, our budget is finite. We don't have the ability. We have a big budget, but it doesn't mean that we can afford to fight for all these standards across the globe. But what would you do in order to ensure people in America, Americans, particularly our children, have access to clean water and shelter if elected to Congress?
Well, remember that you also, as a representative, have to work local. You have to work with your state representatives. You have to work with the entire community. We started this interview talking about all of the different things that are happening in all these different communities. So knowing what's going on in them in the first place is important. But here's a question. Is the government responsible for cleaning up the PFAS contamination in the water at Airway Heights?
Well, where did it come from? If it came from the military base, you bring up a good point. I have a friend of mine that went to Camp Lejeune, and he has an unbelievably rare cancer that even when it is found, is only found in women, and he is a man. So it's a 1 in a billion chance to have this cancer, and it's a 1 in 100 chance that it would be found in a man and not a woman. And he's going into surgery today to have his 5th abdominal surgery, have another tumor removed from his abdominal cavity. And there was some water contamination at Camp Lejeune, but the cutoff date for that treatment was like June. I'm making up a date, but it's literally this close. Say it was June 1988, and he was there in January of 1989. Like he was within 6 or 8 months of the cutoff. So he has gotten zero benefits, but he has been fighting cancer now for 3 years. In all likelihood, this cancer will eventually claim his life within the next 5 years, out of service to our country. And there's no VA benefits for this, right? We talk about the VA. The VA is not taking care of that because it's not related to his service to them. He's not participating in any of the lawsuits that have unfolded. But that was a cleanup on a military site. From my understanding, there are at least some contribution to the PFAS contamination from a military site in Airway Heights, fire retardants and things that were leached into the soil. So yeah, I think that the government does. They made the mess. They got to clean up their own mess. Same thing with Camp Lejeune. That might have been a private company, but I think the Camp Lejeune had a responsibility to the men and women that had signed up and were at boot camp, and they're doing their time to provide them with clean water and sanitation, so that water that he was bathing in, the water that he was drinking, the water that was used to cook his meals, was contaminated with chemicals that have led to a terrible cancer that has affected not just him, but scores of people that that ultimately led to a lawsuit. But they've put strict timelines on that, and he happens to fall just outside that timeline. But there's no other way that he would have gotten this extraordinarily rare cancer if not from his exposure at Camp Lejeune. So yeah, what are you going to do to help fight for these people, for vets that have been sickened, or the people in Airway Heights that have been sickened by the overuse of chemicals and improper cleanup of chemicals at the military base?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is, if you're the congressional representative, like I said, and they cut 135 administrative jobs at the Spokane VA, you pick up the phone and you call Secretary Collins and you say absolutely not, because the care needs to be there. As far as preventative in the first place, then it's not just, by the way, it's not just Fairchild Air Force Base that has those chemicals there. The airport does. Those are chemicals that are found in, as usual, in this particular case, in the fire retardant stuff that they use in drills as well as actual fires. If you're going to talk about your friend's case, then maybe more litigation needs to take place to expand those dates. But there are things
you
that
see the problem with that, though, right?
And what is that?
Well, one, you have now because what you've just said is there needs to be more litigation. So now you're putting it on the victims. because right, so he's struggling and battling for his life, having multiple surgeries and chemos and radiations, everything else to try and stay alive. And your response is, well, we should litigate this. So by the time you get any litigation through, he's long dead. He's not going to see any benefit of that. And you're ultimately putting it on the victims. Well, go fight for your rights. Your rights are only as good as your ability to defend them. What I'm saying is we need a representative government that'll fight for them. Not we'll go fight for it, go to litigate it, go bring another lawsuit.
But where do you draw that line? Because you're first of all.
Well, in this case, I'll draw it at service members.
Well, okay. So here's a question for you again. A litigation system went through on the Spokane 9, and you're saying everything's great. The litigation took place. That's the answer.
That's criminal justice.
It is criminal justice. We're talking about a court system. What is court system?
They're
Criminal
not the same.
justice.
It's not. Civil and criminal are totally different.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it
The
if they
burden
were
of
illegally dumping this material, which was my understanding?
At Camp Lejeune?
My understanding at quite a few of these installations. I spent 26 years in service. We get contaminated a lot with a lot of different stuff. But I was in the pile drivers union and I got contaminated on a job site out there. There was no kind of litigation. They did stop the job because it was a union job and they sent us all to hazmat training and they did a lot of safety stuff out there. Now, do I know what the downstream effects of those contaminations, arsenic and all the other stuff that I was exposed to? No, I do not. But, you have to be taking care of our soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen. That means treatment. But I can't go and turn back the clock. If you want your friend's stuff to be covered with, then perhaps the legislation, then perhaps the dates need to be adjusted. But does Congress go in and do that?
They can.
Possibly. But what else should Congress be doing? There you start talking about the opportunity cost, which is why we have 3 different branches of government, and which is why there are possibilities for class action lawsuits. I'm very sorry to hear about your friend. I am very sorry to hear about that. But when it's personal to you, all of a sudden you seem to have a different standard.
Well, it could be representative of the larger issue. Why are we forbidding anybody health care in the United States? Not just him. I mean, in this case, we're talking about, because this is not an uncommon theme to have a service member who has VA benefits and has a condition that's a result of their service, and they cannot get health care. He is not unique in that scenario. I have loads of patients with hearing issues that were fighting for years because they had improper hearing protection and they're in the artillery. So they were left with hearing damage.
Except I'm in favor of a universal healthcare system in
there
this
you
country,
go.
And you're making which argument now?
Well, because that's exactly right. You were talking about, well, what could you do? Well, if you have a universal healthcare system, then we're not having these debates about who has access to healthcare and who doesn't have access to healthcare.
Then we're in violent agreement.
Right. So then, and then what are you going to do? So then if universal healthcare is a solution, is a means or an end to these means, what is the means? How do you arrive at universal healthcare? Is this Medicare for all? Do you have a plan? How is it? Is this a priority? How do you intend to get something done in Congress?
Remember, one of the worst things that you can do by running for Congress is saying, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to clean up this town, and I'm going to drain the swamp, and I want to be a freshman congressman. For that matter, Baumgartner is a freshman congressman. So what I'm looking at is if we can pass a single-payer healthcare system like they have in Canada, I'll support that. If we can pass a system like the UK's NIH, I will support that. If we can pass a system like they have in Scandinavia and Germany, I'll support that. Or a Japan system, I'll support that. The reason that I like the idea of Medicare for all isn't because I think Medicare for all is the greatest thing since sliced bread. However, the mechanisms for Medicare are already in place. In other words, we do not have to reinvent the wheel in order for Medicare for All to be implemented. We just have to expand the ages and the personnel that can go into it. That will save a tremendous amount on the bureaucracy end of things, which is why I would be most inclined to support Medicare for All. It's not because Medicare is the panacea, it is because the system is already in place. And any bureaucracy needs constant attention. It needs constant reform. The tendency for Americans is to look for silver bullets, to look for simple answers to mind-bogglingly complex questions, and then say, we've solved that problem, now we can go on to something else and never have to worry about it. But that's not the way it works. Remember, we talked about the Farm Bill earlier on. The Farm Bill is changed every 5 years because the markets change. In our case now, the climate is changing. The nature of farming is changing. The demands for the different products that farmers are growing or the livestock they're raising is changing. So it needs constant review. That is, again, the job of a representative. They should be with their finger on the pulse for all of the things that are happening across this country, and then prioritize, because you can't do everything.
I agree. You do need to prioritize. That's why we started off with what is the highest priority? What is the most critical issue? What is most important?
Then I'm going to go back to what I was just talking about. You have to do what can get done. I am not going to be able to go to Washington, D.C., nor is anyone else running, nor is our current sitting congressman able to go there and drive that train. You have to be willing to work with others. That includes across party lines. That includes working with local representatives. That includes with working with state representatives. That is building a synergy, building relationships. And then remember, there's 435 other congressional representatives with their priorities. So the things that we can do, the deals that we can make, are critical. And can that be done across party lines? Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie are a perfect example. On both the Epstein files and on the Iran war, these are guys that are politically probably farther apart than any other two members of Congress, and they're working together on two different issues that they have found they agree on. That can be done, and that should be done. That's part of the job. But you're asking me to say which hill am I going to die on, when I cannot tell you what we can actually get accomplished. Because if it cannot get accomplished, and I'm just tilting at windmills, I'm not representing my district or anyone else.
Well, I'm asking, we want to be representative, right? It's representative government. You want to be our representative. I think it's a fair question. It's a question that probably the most common question people have asked me to ask you and other representatives that came in, or other candidates that hope to be our representative, which is, what is the most important issue and what are you going to do about it? Because that helps us understand, do you actually have a finger on the pulse? Do you actually know what's important to us? And I got to admit, I really think that cost of living, housing, healthcare, that's got to be in the top answer for anybody that you speak to.
But I have addressed those issues. You just don't like the way I've addressed them, and I'm sorry about that.
Well, I don't know about what could be unhappy. I mean, how did you address the cost? I mean, you've gone on, and I've
How do I
taken
address
notes.
the cost of living?
Yeah.
Minimum wage.
So the minimum
Unionizing,
wage.
supporting those things.
Okay.
That is one of the things, but it is a much more complex issue. We could spend a full hour just talking about that. So
Well, pick
when
one. We've
you're
got
saying-
one. You said minimum wage, right?
Okay.
Okay. So in America, when I was a child, I worked as a bartender, and I worked in service industry, and I made $2.13 for an hour's worth of work. And that's true today. There are people, not in our district, but there are people in the country, and this is the federal government, that'll be earning $2.13 for an hour's worth of work in the
That's
United
because
States.
sub-minimum wage is allowed under federal law. Shouldn't be.
Because they
but
can
it
earn
is.
a tip. And then the employer, it's only in cases where you can earn a tip. But there's plenty of side work and additional work that goes along with these jobs that you never have an opportunity to earn a tip. Nobody ever gave me a tip for cleaning the bathroom or rolling up silverware or stocking the bar. They gave me a tip when I gave them a drink, but there's plenty of hours that are worked outside of serving that drink where you have an opportunity to earn a tip. But regardless, you're starting off with a base wage of $2.13 an hour in America, in this economy. So I think a minimum wage, it needs to increase. It hasn't increased in quite some time. But what is the goal? What is a good minimum wage? You're going to fight to increase the minimum wage. What are you going to fight to increase it to, and then how?
To be able to make a living wage in this country, and there is a certain regional aspect of it, but I can tell you that it isn't $7. That's what we're paying, and it hasn't gone up in 20 years. I'm saying that we are probably looking at a minimum wage increase that's going to have to go between $15 and $20 an hour. Now, there will be a lot of pushback on that, especially from the business community. A lot of small businesses think that minimum wage raises will harm their business. Except people can't afford to shop at their shop unless they make enough money to cover their bills. So there's more to it than simply saying, oh, I'm going to go raise it to $15 an hour, I'm going to raise it to $20 an hour. There's an entire campaign that has to take place to go back to our communities and convince them that this has to happen. But it absolutely does have to happen. But if you're going to ask me what exact number, I don't know. That's why we have a Congressional Budget Office, for one thing, or that's why we have these other committees to do those studies. But it's certainly not $7 an hour. And there are these guys in the House of Representatives called Republicans. They'd like to do away with the minimum wage altogether. So in order to get something through, it will be a compromise. That's a promise.
Okay, so you want to fight for an increase in the minimum wage to double or more what it is now?
It's got to be probably more than double.
Okay. Well, obviously, the first answer from probably some of the Republican colleagues and from others would be this will result in an increase in prices because the cost of providing goods and services will go up because the cost of labor has gone up. So what do you say to those? Because you can expect that argument. You know that that's coming.
Right.
So what do you say to that?
It's never been an actual true argument before, and it will not be a true argument again.
So it's just that it's not true.
It's simply not true.
Okay. All right. And then in terms of housing, cost of living, I think housing is particularly in our district, and this is one thing that I don't believe more people don't bring to Baumgartner's are not critical of. In the past 5, 6, 7 years, we've seen the property values in our county, in this region, skyrocket. And along with it, so did the tax that we were paying into the county and into the city also skyrocket. But as those costs have gone up significantly, rent's gone up dramatically, housing's gone up dramatically, by some miracle, none of the things that are funded with those taxes were still broke, even though the amount of revenue they were collecting had gone up significantly while he was secretary. But what is it? What action would you take? What solution would you fight for in Congress to address the national housing crisis that has been unfolding for generations, not for 5 years, not for 10 years, but for generations?
Again, housing, homelessness, there are multiple pieces of that. One of them is pay is too low. But we have to look at access. The first-time home buyer just 15 years ago was 29 years old. Today, it's over 40 years old. That's signs of a bigger problem. We have Wall Street bankers that are putting young people into debt on student loans. So in order to get the education that we are told you have to get when you're a young person in order to make a decent living, you have to go into the hole. And these are terms for those loans, by the way, that are illegal in any other context in the United States. The terms of student loans are completely illegal any other way because they're loan shark terms. So you got young people coming out of school that are coming out with 20 to 30 years of debt to Wall Street bankers. Now they finally claw their way out of that hole. And then they have to get a home loan and pay off those same Wall Street bankers for another 30 years. It's a racket. Now, another piece of that is going to be talking about how young people trying to get into a home are finding it that it is completely economically out of reach. The last statistic that I saw is that for people who are currently not homeowners, 70% of them, home ownership is literally out of reach. This is another reason to raise salaries. It's another reason to put some regulations on the banking. But then there's some other solutions. General McChrystal, since he has left the military, is at the Aspen Institute, and what he is talking about is a GI Bill type benefit for young people to become stakeholders in our country and in our economy, so they can go and do service to the country. For example, teachers, firefighters, police, public servants in rural areas, in inner city areas, and they will receive for 2 years service GI Bill type benefits. This is an investment, and we've done it before. We had the WPA, we had the Conservation Corps, we had programs like this, and they worked swimmingly. Are they expensive? Yes, they are expensive to initiate. But the downstream effect can be demonstrated in the single piece of legislation that made more economic difference and benefited more Americans than any other single piece of legislation in this country's history. That's the GI Bill. Because more people who would never have been able to darken the threshold of an institution of higher learning or a job skill. Remember, GI Bill not just paid for my college education, it was paying me when I was going through my apprenticeship program in the Pile Drivers Union. Those kind of benefits make an economic powerhouse out of the upcoming workforce. Those are the things where people will be able to get into a house. It's accessibility. You can build all the houses you want, but if they're still economically out of reach, it's not going to solve your housing problem.
Okay, so we used to have a program that was through HUD and the FHA that was for teachers, firefighters, police officers, nurses, so that these people would live within their community. They were particularly interested in police because they found that police officers did had a greater connection to the community, therefore less violent interactions with the community when they lived in the community, which I would like to see here in our district, because we have so many officers that live outside of our state that come into our state and then police our communities. But that was through HUD, and it was the teacher and firefighter program, but it applied to police officers and other professions in which they were given down payment assistance and low interest rates, in addition to a really good deal on these properties where the second mortgage essentially was a 20-30% down payment that would be forgiven after they lived in the home for a number of years and maintained their employment with the local.
When did it get cut?
I haven't been in the mortgage business in a long time. I don't know that it was cut, but in all likelihood, it was. But my point is that there are mechanisms that can be
that is
used
what Congress
now,
should be doing,
and that is exactly what Congress should be doing now.
But I'm afraid I have to get going. But I appreciate that you gave me the time this morning. Appreciate you asking the questions. More than happy to keep in touch. Nice to have met you on Reddit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
care.
Good luck.